So this is a meeting of the Just Transition Subcommittee of the Vermont Climate Council on Thursday, March 11th at 4 o'clock. So welcome, I'm Sarah Phillips. I'm the Director of the Office of Economic Opportunity in the Agency of Human Services, and I'm co-chairing this committee with Sue Minter, who's here as well. And I'm going to be facilitating this meeting, although I'm having a little bit of tech issues, so bear with me as I try and make it work here. And I'm trying to also manage the lobby. Okay, so I think what we have an ambitious agenda here this morning. So the first thing on our agenda is just and I'll remind folks to mute yourself if you're not speaking. That will help with the audio. But I think the first thing on our agenda today is to just look through the agenda and verify that's our plan for today and make adjustments. So the agenda was posted, and let's see, I can't share my screen, so I won't share it with you. But the first thing is to just approve the minutes, and then we will introduce subcommittee members, and I think really introduce all subcommittee members so we all meet each other. We decided to put a standing item on our agenda for updates from Jane, who's the director of the Global Warming Solution Act, or heading up the Vermont Climate Council Press. So she'll provide some important updates. We had some homework to review the open meeting law, and subcommittee members hopefully received some other information to review, and I think we may do a Q&A of that today, and if not, we can push that to another meeting depending on if our guest to support us is here tonight. And then the two big things for tonight are to review our subcommittee charter, and I think not just review it, but hopefully get that to a final place. As I understand it, that's the request, if we can. Prior to the next Climate Council meeting, the full meeting of the council. And then the other key task for us tonight is to really look, we had decided we wanted to look at some, or do a scan of some of the work of our neighboring states around climate work and just transitions to kind of get our juices flowing in terms of what this work might look like. So that's the agenda we have scheduled today, and as always, we'll have time for public comment at the end, and otherwise during the meeting, the dialogue is really about staff and subcommittee members. So any comments on the agenda or changes? Questions? Yes, Sue.
I just want to confirm that at this point, this agenda has been developed by Sarah and me as a response to what we sort of set forth at the end of the agenda. So as there are things evolving in your mind, we'll talk about them at the end so we can get to them in our next meeting. And I do, there's a few things we can talk about, but we're pretty packed for this meeting. But I just wanted to explain how the agendas evolve. Thanks.
Yeah, that's great. Exactly. We'll use the end of the meeting to kind of try and set some goals for our next meeting. Thank you, Sue. Okay, great. So with that, we will, I guess, Jane, can I just clarify, are we prepared to discuss the open meeting law tonight, or perhaps that's a future meeting topic, and we have plenty of other things to discuss tonight?
Great. If we could defer till next week, it was on my really long to-do list to coordinate yesterday with you, Sarah and Sue, around inviting Matt and checking in to make sure that you wanted to do that tonight. And my apologies, I never closed the circle on that. So Matt's not here, but he's prepared to be here next week, I'm sure. So I'll make sure I schedule him after today.
That's excellent. And probably all the better, because we have some really meaty stuff to discuss today. So that's
Good.
Great. So we'll skip over that item. And otherwise, our subcommittee has tried to operate through consensus. So hearing no objections, we'll adopt that agenda for tonight.
Great.
So then the next item is to, for those subcommittee members who were in attendance last week, we have some draft minutes, and again, unless there's items to discuss on that or objections, I'll pause for a moment. Okay, hearing none, then I think we'll consider that those minutes have been adopted. Okay. Hopefully that process works for people. It relies on everyone to just jump in, but please do jump in. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to you, Jane, and to provide some updates and additional information. I think you were going to share.
I think we're going to introduce ourselves first.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. We were going to do that first. Thanks, Sue. My screen has frozen, so I actually don't have the agenda. I might have to turn over facilitating to you if I'm totally going to goof it.
I've got mine, so we're good.
Okay. So, so what I'll do is maybe what I'll do is just call out individuals to introduce themselves, even if you're somebody who's new or not new. I think we all want to get to know who's here. So I think that will be helpful. I'll try and catch everybody, but my apologies in advance. And I do think it's helpful if subcommittee members are able to show themselves with your camera. I think that's always really great so we can see each other. And then after subcommittee members, I'll try and quickly introduce staff as well. And maybe just who you are and your organization you want to add a little bit in addition, that would be great, but there are a lot of us, so if we can keep ourselves abbreviated, I think that'll be great. So I did introduce myself. I'll just say that part of what the Office of Economic Opportunity does is administer funding for community organizations around the state that are working on issues to address issues of poverty. And that's the work that our office does. And in particular, we administer the Low-Income Weatherization Program, which is obviously focused on addressing some of the specificals of the around climate action. So, Sue, do you want to introduce yourself?
Great. Yes, I'm Sue Minter. I'm the Executive Director of Capstone Community Action, which actually works in partnership with the State Office of Economic Opportunity. And Capstone is one of 5 community action agencies around the state that support the needs of low-income Vermonters in a variety of ways. Super thrilled to be here with all of you, and very excited because I feel like we've really expanded our circle in ways that I hope are really meaningful. And we're glad to have others here. Thank you so much for your time.
Great. And then maybe I will tag in Kelly, who's here, I can see.
Hello. I'm Kelly Klein. I am the owner of Grunfell Meadery and Havoc Mead in St. Albans, Vermont. I am a member of the Climate Council as the representative for small businesses. And I'm pleased to be on this committee as well as the Cross-Sector Mitigation Committee. So I'll be acting as liaison between that committee and ours.
Great, thanks, Kelly. How about Beverly? Beverly, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're really glad to have you be joining our committee. Do you want to introduce yourself?
How to figure out how to unmute myself. My name is Beverly Little Thunder, and I am on the Native American Commission for Vermont. I live in Huntington, Vermont, and I am involved in so many things I can't even think of all of them. I am on the board of directors for Earthwalk, and I am the co-founder of the organization that we have a 501c3 on, and that's Kunsikea Tamakoche, and that's also located here in Vermont. Thank you.
Thank you. So glad to have you. I think that I also saw Eris. Is that Eris? You'll have to correct me if I didn't get your name correctly, Garcia.
Yep, you got it right.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eris Garcia. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Community Engagement Manager and Volunteer Manager at the Peace and Justice Center in Burlington, Vermont. I also live and support Kunsikea, and also my greatest honor is being Beverly's granddaughter. So just so everyone knows too. Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Wonderful. That's great. Thank you. Chris, are you here tonight?
Yes, Chris Campany.
Yes, Chris Campany.
Yep.
Do you want to introduce?
Yep. Hey, I'm Chris Campany. I'm Executive Director of Wyndham Regional Commission. We're the planning commission for 27 towns in Southeast Vermont. I was appointed to be represent municipal interests by the legislature, by the House. My interests in the Just Transition Subcommittee in a prior life, I did a lot of work with in sustainable agriculture and a lot of equity issues there, working in the South with Black farmers. Worked on federal ag and rural development policy when I was federal policy coordinator for the national campaign for sustainable agriculture. And prior to that, even I was at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in D.C. in the very earliest days when they actually began to address environmental justice or equity as an agency back when Gore first came in. So as a planner, we deal with equity and access issues. Planning can be a very powerful tool for good, but also for bad. And so it's a constant effort to make sure that the work we do is inclusive.
Thanks, Chris. Let's see. Can I actually am having a really hard time on Teams today. My Teams has frozen. So I think Nadia, you're here. If you want to introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Nadia Marquez Pabst. I'm a law clerk at the law offices of Wilmington, Campbell, Benton, Stasny here in Manchester, Vermont. I have over a decade of experience in energy, tech, regulatory regimes, specifically around energy and the future of work. Previously, I worked at General Motors Cruise Automation, which is an all-electric, zero-emissions rideshare company. I worked at NextEra Energy and Florida Power and Light. They are the largest wind and solar renewable company in the world, as well as the owner of Florida Power and Light, so an electric utility, and also with Advanced Microgrid Solutions, an energy storage company, and really focusing on the ways in which our energy policies, as well as the programs to integrate them most effectively, really ensure equity. So thank you for having me again.
Thanks, Nadia. Yeah. Iris, I saw you're here tonight. If you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Iris. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a student at Essex High School, as well as a student climate activist. I'm involved in a ton of different youth groups and organizations, and I'm a member on the EWSC school board.
Thanks, Iris. Jennifer, Micah, are you here tonight?
Yes, I'm even on camera, Sarah. So.
Oh, well.
I'm Jennifer Micah. I'm general counsel for the Vermont Department for Children and Families, and I have experience working in all the different departments, well, not all of them, several departments within the Agency of Human Services. Thank you.
Excellent, great. I really apologize, folks, and I would close my Teams and re-log in, except that I'm recording the meeting, and I fear that would disrupt our recording. So I'm actually not able to see folks on Teams. I know it looks like, hopefully it looks like I can see you. So I can't see who else is here tonight. Sue, maybe you could walk us through tagging.
Yeah, I can. I want to welcome Kaya to introduce herself. Thanks. I can do this.
Thank you. Thank you both. Hi, everyone. I'm Kaya Morris. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Movement Politics Director for Rights and Democracy Vermont. I also am a former legislator, having served 2 terms in the House of Representatives. I'm a part of a regional collaborative across New England states that are all working on climate issues, and running a statewide coalition here in Vermont that is specific to these very goals. So I'm very excited to be in company with you all, and looking forward to the work ahead.
Awesome. I think at this moment that may be all of the members, although we have others we can talk about. I want to turn to staff and welcome Jane to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. This is really special. It's really great to be here and see this all coming together so nicely. So Jane Lazorchek. I am the director of the Global Warming Solutions Act. I've been on board for all of a month as of tomorrow. And before that, I worked at the Fish and Wildlife Department for 16 years doing public land acquisition and management. And that's pretty much before that, I worked at the Nature Conservancy in Montpelier for 6 years and got my master's degree in ecology. So I'm excited to dive in with you all on this journey of development of the Climate Action Plan and meaningful public engagement. So I'll save a little bit more for when I provide some updates on where we are with some of that work. So thank you for having me today.
Thanks, Jane. Liz Shields, are you there?
I am here. Hi, everyone. My name is Liz, and I am an AmeriCorps member serving with the Department of Environmental Conservation, and that's in the Agency of Natural Resources. And I'm here as a staff person in representation of that, and I'm happy to be here.
Terrific. Ross McDonald, are you here?
I am, Sue. Ross McDonald. Hello, everyone. I'm the Public Transit Program Manager at the Agency of Transportation. Here to serve you as you deem appropriate, and also hopefully consider the mobility needs and transportation issues that surround a lot of these policies. Thank you.
Nice. I want to welcome Amanda. Are you here?
I am. Hello, everyone. I work with Sue at Capstone, and my main task on this committee will be kind of administrative in nature and note taking, but also hoping to contribute a lot of lived experience I've had. Nice to meet you all.
Awesome. And Ellie Curtis, who is a Capstone intern who we'll be hearing from later. Are you here, Ellie?
Yes, hi. I'm Ellie. I'm a junior in college, originally from Waitsfield, and I'm hoping to bring some background research into this area, and I'm really excited to join you all. So thank you for having me.
Great. All right. Is there someone who is a member or a staff that I'm somehow not finding or inviting to share their welcome?
Yeah, hi, Sue. This is Abby Willard. I'm also staff to support the subcommittee and glad to be available as needed, representing the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I did not see you. So there is Virginie here? No. Okay. Just because Abby was here, there are two people who are potential additional members who we've been in touch with. I, as a follow-on to our last meeting, reached out again to Abel from Migrant Justice, who I'm still sort of waiting to get back in touch or have him be back in touch with me, but I'm optimistic that he may be joining us. And Abby reached out to Danielle from a trade unionist who seemed very open and interested and eager. And I think we're waiting to hear back from her, maybe. I know we reached out. Any update on that, Abby?
I think the feedback from Danielle Bombardier was that she was interested in serving on the subcommittee. She had both the willingness to, make the time commitment work, even the Thursday afternoon timeframe generally worked with her availability, except for the second Thursday. She has a standing union meeting beginning at 5. And I actually felt like her contribution representing the workplace and the workforce as we make kind of some of these transitions around climate change would make her a really great fit for the committee. So she was not particularly available today, but could start being available next week if the decision was to invite her to join the committee.
And I do know that Danielle was hoping to join us by phone today. So Danielle, if you are here by phone, feel free to introduce yourself. Okay.
Hi, this is Danielle. Yes, I'm here. Thank you for having me. I'm Danielle Bombardier, Secretary Treasurer for the Vermont AFL-CIO and a member of the Vermont Building and Construction Trades Council. My background in the trades movement has been 7 years working as an electrician and 3 years working for the IBEW as a union organizer. So happy to be here and meet you all.
That is great. We're so excited. Sarah, do you want me to hand it back to you?
Yeah, I think I can take it from here. I think I can facilitate even if I can't see people.
Well, if
So,
you have a problem, I'm happy. I just want to
Great.
mention that we are a group that's a little bit larger than they kind of were recommending, but we're so thrilled by the strength of this circle. And everyone here is representing a whole more concentric circles. And I think that is really the thrust of what we are trying to do and bring especially voices that have not necessarily been at this table into this circle at the center. And so we welcome you to this center, knowing that there are many concentric circles and communities that we all represent and bring into this place. And I'm just really thrilled to have us here. Sarah, I didn't want to interrupt, but I just kind of wanted to say that.
Yeah, I really love it, Sue. Thank you. And so, as you mentioned, I think we also have another member, Virginie, who works at Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity. She was able to join us last week. So we'll continue from there. So, Jane, I think you are next on the agenda. I found my agenda, and I think I'll hand it over to you to talk about some of the planning tools, I think, or I don't know if that's what you'd call them, that you shared, and any other important updates that we should be aware of.
Okay, hopefully my kids are in the next room and they just decided to start kind of yelling, so hopefully they don't interrupt. But hold on. They're interrupting my train of thought.
No, that's all right.
I'm going to take this moment to say, I hope at a next soon meeting, we can actually break into smaller groups to get to know one another a little better. I think I'm going to be exploring how the open meeting law affects that, but I really think it's important for us to learn a little bit more, become more centered together. But anyway.
Thanks, Sue, for that. Okay, so for 2 seconds, I guess I just thought I'd orient, since there are so many new members, I'm not sure what your base understanding is of how this is all operating. And so just for 2 minutes, if you'd entertain me, it was really nice to hear Liz state that she works for DEC right after me, and I didn't even recognize that. Just for all of your benefit, I'm housed within the Agency of Natural Resources, and for your benefit, the chair of the Climate Council is the Secretary of the Agency of Administration, but the sort of purse of the work, all the funding went to the Agency of Natural Resources, where ultimately the rules and many of the strategies and programs developed over the next year for the Climate Action Plan will live and continue to be updated on a regular basis as is obligated by statute. So I sit under the Secretary of Natural Resources. My job is I'm learning as I go what my job is, but for the foreseeable future, it's helping empower all of you to do your work through the subcommittees. And ultimately, I'll be responsible for knitting together the strategies and recommendations that all the subcommittees put forward into the Climate Action Plan. I'll be supported in that work with some of the tools and contracts that we'll have in place to help us develop the Climate Action Plan. And I wanted to speak to those briefly tonight because some of them will have a real direct impact, especially on the work of the Just Transition Subcommittee. We have selected a facilitator for the Climate Action Plan work. That facilitator will be instrumental in facilitating Climate Council meetings as well as the steering committee of the Climate Council, but is also here to serve the subcommittees at their request. So as you dive into some more tricky conversations or start to sort of really need some thought about process and procedural, that team of people, I should say, is available to all of you. And we just signed the contract yesterday with Consensus Building Institute, who's also just finished, sort of hot off the presses, facilitating the process for the state of Maine, which also had a Just Transitions Committee and has a very similar equity lens for which they're putting their climate work through. And for all your benefits, I did mention to Sarah and Sue today, I know we're going to be led through the work by the intern for Capstone, but I did reach out to Maine's Climate Council project manager, and I'm meeting with her on Tuesday. And one of the things is to start to talk about cross-pollination of resources with other states who have just done similar processes. So in addition to the facilitator, we will have, we just closed on Monday an RFP for public engagement, outreach, and marketing. We're trying to tie all three of those things into one contract. Whether we do that well enough or not is left to be seen. But luckily for us, Sarah and Sue, and I bring this up because any of you are welcome to be involved in that process and see those proposals. But Sarah and Sue are on the review committee to actually vet the 4 proposals we got for that work. And that contractor is obligated to participate in these subcommittee meetings and think early on with all of you about what meaningful engagement means, as well as help think about the actual statutory responsibilities of public engagement at different points along the way. So that is coming online in the next few weeks, and I welcome anyone else who would like to participate or see those vendors and offer comments. We would benefit from any of your eyes on that. And then from there on forward, I've been struggling and trying to sort of like think about how I can help subcommittees with procedural processes documents to get you guys teed up and ready to go to sort of embark on the ambitious work plans that you have on a very short timelines. And so most recently, to sort of stay on task administratively, we shared with all of you a very detailed, I thought, hopefully it wasn't too detailed for all of you, but a procedural document last week when we met. I called it a cheat sheet, but hopefully that will help with all of you with respect to how to take minutes, administer meetings, post meetings, open meeting laws, public records. I encourage not only Sarah and Sue, but all of you to look at that procedurally, especially as you think about how you take minutes going forward, although you're lucky to have Amanda helping in that capacity. And then finally, we also shared the open, not finally, I should say one more piece. We shared the open governance training, which Sarah and Sue had in the agenda for this week, and we'll kick to next week. But as all of you know, this is an open process governed by the open meeting law as well as the Public Records Act. And so there was a training held for Vermont climate counselors early on at the first meeting of the Climate Council. And all of those, that video of that presentation, as well as the supporting documents, were made available to all of you in the memo that I sent attached to the email. It's required for new members to review all of that. And then at the meeting next week, Matt Chapman, our general counsel for A&R, will join us and just be generally available to help answer any questions about process around how we actually move forward with meaningful content and substantive meetings, but also complying with open meeting laws. And so the final piece, as you think towards the Climate Council meeting at the end of March, is the goal for that meeting is for subcommittees to come back with your final subcommittee charges or charters, whatever. I think we're calling them charters at this point. They were called descriptions, charges, charters. We're calling them charges, I should say, not charters. And today it sounds like you'll work to finalize that. That will feed up into what has been sort of put forward as a draft process roadmap. And our hope is to present a final one, final roadmap for how the work will get done at the Climate Council meeting on the 22nd. So your work today is really meaningful for that. And to take it a step further from the charge, I provided some tools with respect to sort of the sidebars, guideposts directly from the statute around what will be needed for the climate action plan ultimately. And I shared that along with a draft Gantt chart. And then in my conversations back and forth with others around that Gantt chart, it became clear that what seemed to be the best use of time is there's 5 subcommittees. 3 of those subcommittees are sort of what we're thinking of as technical subcommittees, and 2 subcommittees we're thinking about as in service to the larger goals of the plan, as well as in service to those 3 subcommittees. And the Just Transitions Committee and the Science and Data Committee are those 2 that are in service to some larger goals, as well as the technical committees. And so what I was hoping is that this week at the other subcommittees, they will finalize their Gantt charts. They will then share them with your subcommittee, and hopefully they will inform your work, since you'll be thinking about public engagement on its own, and then thinking about this equity, inclusion, diversity, all these lenses to run through the work that's coming out of the other subcommittees. So I did not expect that your subcommittee will use the Gantt chart that I shared around, although even without it filled out, you'll see that we've really tried to flush out those milestones and add a lot more detail, so everybody can start thinking about what they need to get through in order to meet the statutory requirements of the Climate Action Plan. So that's a lot, and I'm always happy to sort of unload like that on all of you at the beginning, and in the future, hopefully I can, not be so all over the place and more refined, but I always will plan to join these meetings and be here as a resource to help answer questions as you start to embark on the work, and hopefully help you by developing things in between meetings, or supporting you in whatever way I can, or bringing in facilitator when you guys need it, or other contractual services that we'll have available for you all. So happy to answer any questions, and probably should have paused along the way, so thank you. And Sue, I see your hand, so go ahead.
I just wanted to mention.
Yep, go ahead, Sue.
I was just going to mention that Jane mentioned that Sarah and I were asked to join to be part of the review team of the public engagement RFP, and just I'm wondering, Jane, if people have the energy and interest, can they ask you to send it to them, or one of us? The main important thing is that we, Sarah and I, have to finalize our own review of this by the end of day tomorrow. I haven't begun, so I think it's really important. But if you are interested, you got to sort of do it in the next 12, 15 hours so that I can incorporate your concerns or your thoughts. And that's kind of the speed with which we've been dancing right now. But I'd be interested, and I don't know what the best strategy for getting the word out to is. I don't think I'm the right person. Maybe Sarah's better than me at responding.
I can, and so a couple things on that. I don't see why, if we're needing more time, I can't imagine. Elle set that deadline of tomorrow at the end of the day. I don't want to speak for Elle, but I doubt Elle's going to digest that information over the weekend. And so I don't see why we couldn't make it sometime on Monday that it's back, recognizing that I know all of you tend to burn the candles at both ends, and maybe a weekend of reading 4 proposals is better than trying to fit it in a workday. And so happy to consider extension on that timeline. And then I am happy to share those proposals directly with whoever wants them. And rather than sort of having to funnel through you, Sue, or Sarah, I don't see why we couldn't have them work into the same process and have Elle be the one who sort of compiles those comments equitably and ranks everybody fairly. So I don't see why anybody couldn't participate at an equal level if they wanted to.
Sure. So, and I can say I've already told Elle that I'm going to do it over the weekend. So, and she was fine with that. So
perfect.
I would even invite that if anyone is interested in reviewing all 4, there's some very specific things to respond to. I'm happy. I have that, and I'm happy to forward it to you. And I think everyone has my email since I've been emailing the group. So you can use the chat box or just check in with me after, and I'm happy to forward that to you. And then I'm happy to let Elle know that someone else on our team is also going to review them. So I think that'd be welcome.
And what that just prompted a reminder for me that because it came up with a different subcommittee about, I was trying to share documents through a SharePoint site, and I couldn't with the new members because they didn't have state email addresses yet. And what I want to tell you all as new members is I've submitted all of your names to Agency of Digital Services this morning. Oh, Beverly, you're sharing a really cute screen with umbrellas. And so at either by the end of today or tomorrow, you'll be getting emails from ADS prompting you to call and set up your state emails. And you actually have to call in to do that. But anyway, but within the next day or two, you'll all have state emails. And because of the open meeting law, we all need to use the state emails for business related to the Climate Council.
Great. So I'm going to, unless there's other pressing questions for Jane, I'm going to keep us moving along. But I really love this framework that our committee is in service to the work of the Climate Council. And if we keep that in mind, it will help us in thinking about our timeline and our work ahead. So other questions?
Oh,
okay.
I'm really sorry to keep talking. One more thing, since Chris put it in the chat about Zoom. The facilitator came, if you'll recall, perhaps the state didn't feel like we had capacity to support a different platform than Teams, but we were supportive of moving to a preferred platform that the facilitator would like. And we all know that the facilitator we've chosen is preferential to Zoom. And so I'm meeting with the facilitator tomorrow about a laundry list, one of the things being switching platforms from Microsoft Teams to Zoom. And so I'm still cautiously hopeful that perhaps we'll be able to shift to Zoom, which seems like the majority preference of everybody. Kaya, I see your hand.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify. I'm sorry. So the folks that have already been appointed to the subcommittee should probably already have a partner.vermont.gov. So that's what we should be communicating with you all through until we get ours. But like even like right now, we should probably be communicating to you through that one if you don't already have a Vermont.gov.
Yeah. So like Sue, if you're communicating with Sue, you should use her partner.gov for this work, not her.
Okay. Okay. All right. Do we have that information? Sorry if it was in a doc that I didn't see.
Gosh. I don't
or if
know.
not, can folks just throw that in the chat, you know?
about what their email addresses are or how the emails right now your personal email is included because I don't have you set up on a state email yet. So when when we shift you to the state, you will get instructions about how to make that migration happen.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of you who don't yet have your partner email yet, but you will have that. And I am happy to, in correspondence, include your personal email in addition to your official email. For instance, if there's something that we're asking people to respond to quickly, I think that's fine. And so I'm happy to do that.
And I'm really sorry to just the only reason we ask you not to use personal email is not actually it's not a problem for it to go to your personal email, but just so you all know, and you'll learn this through the trainings. When you send this work to your personal email, you're opening a door that if there's a public records request that they have to go into your personal email. So it's trying to protect you from having to open up your personal email or your other work email or other things from a public records request. But happy to use it if that's still your choice. So.
Okay, Jane, I'm cutting you off.
Cut me off. Yeah. I'm going to mute.
Great. Okay. And we will continue to refine these meetings to help us move into the meat of the work as well. Always in the beginning of this work, there's so much process-oriented stuff. So thanks, everyone, for hanging in there. So I think the next item on our agenda is to look at the subcommittee charter. So I'm going to try and share my screen, and hopefully folks can see that. I am back on Teams. I figured that out. So bear with me. I think this will be helpful. Can folks see that if you're online? Yeah? Okay, great. So the first part, and I shared this with our subcommittee members, is this section right here where it says 3. This is the section that's actually in statute. So as Jane points out in our meeting, this is the part that we must do. We have to keep an eye on this piece and be focused on that. Oh, somebody else is sharing I'm taking the screen back. All right, hopefully you're seeing that again. Okay. All right. So just to kind of keep focus on that, I'm not going to read it, but hopefully people did read it ahead of this meeting, right? And maybe we can, as part of this conversation, if people want to share kind of what jumps out at them in that statute or in the charter that we want to talk through, let's think about it in that way.
See what she's.
Okay. And then a charter has been drafted for us, and so part of what we're tasked with doing is I'll make it a little bit bigger here too. Part of what we're tasked with doing tonight is to try and refine this charter to send back to the full Climate Council to formally adopt. And I think that we're asked to send it back next Thursday, Wednesday or Thursday. So maybe if we don't get through it entirely tonight, we could push the envelope because we could still get it out in advance of the next Climate Council meeting if we meet again next week. But let's try as a task, if you all are with me, to try and refine this tonight if we can. And so this is the charter that's been drafted for us. So I'm going to start with the statute because I think that it's just helpful for us to all have a shared understanding of the statute. But yes, Beverly, I see your hand.
I can't see it on my screen.
Okay. Well, I did, if it's helpful, I did share the statute language in an email, and attached to the meeting invitation is the charter language. So I'll try for those folks who might just be calling, so you might be able to pull it up on your own, but also for folks who might be calling in, maybe I will read, I'm not going to read the whole charter, it's like 4 paragraphs, but I will read the statutory language just so folks can have that maybe. And it just says that the subcommittee will focus on ensuring that strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to build resilience to adapt to the effects of climate change benefit and support all residents of the state fairly and equitably. The subcommittee shall ensure that strategies consider the disproportionate impact of climate change on rural, low-income, and marginalized communities, and that programs and incentives for building resilience are designed to be accessible to all Vermonters and do not unfairly burden any groups, communities, geographic locations, or economic sectors. This subcommittee may adopt a measurement tool to assess the equitability of programs and strategies considered by the council. Are there questions? Oh, I see a hand up. Are there questions about that? And let's see, who has their hand up? Go ahead.
Hey, it's Chris. So one of the things I brought up at the last meeting that I think we're going to have to look at is the intersection of, especially when it comes to economic sectors, which then, right, it's none of these things are mutually exclusive from one another, right? As far as, about unfairly burdening any groups, communities, there we go, geographic locations or economic sectors, and all the other parameters that we're supposed to look at. I think we have to take into account or have to look at, and maybe this is something we can reach out to the data group about, is kind of the overall health of different sectors anyway. And I'm going to use, I grew up in coal country in southwestern Virginia, and you would always hear the discussion around, it was like it was jobs versus the environment, and and then would get into the environmental equity issues, and it was in some respects kind of it was a false argument because labor was being taken out of the equation already by automation and just basically the companies trying to reduce the amount of labor involved in coal mining anyway. And then I shared at our last meeting information from the podcast Timber Wars, where in addition to the environmental challenges to the economy of forestry in the Pacific Northwest, you already had the big logging landowners and the processors changing the structure there. And to my mind, we need to look, we'll want to take into account and encourage the council to take into account kind of what's going on in the different sectors anyway to help inform the burdens and how to mitigate those burdens, because there are some other ongoing structural issues at work, like in agriculture and other sectors. and we know that the burdens within those sectors, just whatever the issues might be, are going to be borne by those marginalized communities that already exist. So I'm just hopeful that we can get some data. I don't know exactly what all they're looking at. I'm sure they're looking at greenhouse gas emissions and other things, but I think we need some pretty detailed economic data by sector so that we can encourage the different committees to think through how do you mitigate those impacts within the context of the other things that are going on, structurally. So like with dairy, right, the lack of a competitive market and getting a fair price for their milk, which I'm sure the in addition to what's happening to the farmers themselves, is then also getting, impacting the farm workers and other people in dairy farm communities. So anyway, just there are a lot of examples that we could look at, but just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, thanks. So I think let's definitely hold on to this piece around how do we pull in the current context, particularly around different sectors and labor markets into the full understanding of the picture. So I think that makes a lot of sense. So other sort of thoughts or reactions to the statutory language before we move on to the charter? Anything else anyone stands out for anyone that they wanted to offer a reflection on there? Okay, great. So one of the challenges I think that we experience in this work as a subcommittee is that sometimes we all may have participated on work groups, for instance, or committees where we might edit a document like this, sending it back and forth by email, right? That's not really something that we can do under public meeting law. So the point of this meeting is that we actually will look at this charter today and identify some changes that we want to make. And certainly we can come back and sort of task someone with taking those changes, refining the language, bringing it back to our group to finalize if we need another meeting to do that. But I just want to name that can be particularly challenging in this kind of forum to do that kind of work together. We're going to try anyway. So hopefully folks have had a chance to look at the Just Transition Subcommittee Charter. Because not everyone can see my screen, I'll just ask, would anyone want me to read this? Would that be helpful, or have folks been able to pull it up on their own screen if they can't see the screen today? And my Teams is also frozen again, so please just speak up if you need to jump in case I can't see your hand. Sue, go ahead. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. I'm going to leap forward if I could. I don't know if we have time to read the entire thing, but there are some thoughts I wanted to ask the group to consider. Some are just words, but people may remember that Chris and I, along with Amanda and Liz, sort of put together some thoughts about enhanced sort of engagement ideas. And one of the things that it could be just semantics, but the second, or maybe it's the third paragraph, gets to the public participation. And it says the Just Transition Subcommittee will also have a leading role in designing a public participation plan, blah, blah, blah. I just think we might want to add the word designing and guiding. That's a suggestion I have. And also, I guess I feel that it is not just about sort of saying, here, go do it, but like helping to make sure it's that's why I think that word guiding is a little more thoughtful. And then we had talked as a group and then as a work group about ensuring early and ongoing engagement. And we talked actually about engagement in a broader sense, frankly, than just this climate action plan. The whole cycle of once a plan is developed, bringing voices into the development, as well as, the policy rollout and the implementation, that whole kind of life cycle, I think, Chris Campany, you shared. So that's just a concept that I wanted to offer to add. I also wondered if we even, I think shorter is better. I think I had other thoughts, but that's it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sue. Yeah, so I'm not going to read it because I didn't hear anyone say, please, Sarah, read it. But I think, you know, the first section, I think I'll just pull out just to make sure we're touching on sort of the key points. There's a lot of words here, right? But the first section really is focusing on us developing principles, I think jumps out at me as a key section to just, our job is to develop some principles by which this work will be done, you know, just transitions principles. So that's an interesting idea for us to think about. I think to guide the other, in service of the other committees, right? I think looking at the State of Vermont equity assessment and potentially some other equity tools, I think is something that our other subcommittees are looking for from us. I think, you know, this last paragraph really deals with engagement, and Sue jumps there, which I think is great. And I think part of that is also some tools to assess the efficacy of the engagement. So like not just guiding and doing it, but are we really reaching the communities and truly getting engagement in the way that we intend to? So I think that's valuable. And then, you know, this section in here is really just talking more about, you know, principles, tools, what that really means, tools, processes. I think this piece right here in the middle is to the extent we're able to join and participate in other subcommittees. So you already heard Kelly explain that she's going to participate on the cross-sector mitigation committee. So even if our subcommittee members aren't formally seated as subcommittee members in other committees, we may want to consider if we are strategically placing ourselves on the other subcommittees to support them in their work, right? So that I think is something for us to consider. That's what I'm reading as part of the meeting here for number 2. And then I think number 3, just to point out right here, is that part of our job will be to review the recommendations from other subcommittee and, you know, what the deliverable is on that. I'm not sure. Like, obviously, we could just review them, but to what end? Like, are we going to issue some recommendations or some thoughts? Would there be a report? So I think we can think about that a little bit more. We don't need to finalize that today, but I just offer that as kind of a summary of what I see in this charter, and I'm wondering, is there anyone else, you know, what else are you seeing in this charter that's jumping out at you, and how are you feeling about those charges for us? Kaya, I think you have your hand up.
Thank you. I do. So one of the things that I think is going to be important in here, and I didn't see it within the charter, we're speaking a lot about equity, but really, truly, in order for us to meet our goals, we need to be talking about environmental justice, which is different than environmental equity. So within the way that many of our communities kind of speak, different folks that are frontline that are trying to be on the cusp of this piece, we're talking about a necessity to repair the harm. So it's not just let's bring everybody up to equal, because that in order to do that, there has to, that mitigation that we're doing for our climate also has to happen with regards to the harm. There's like a sort of reparative and restorative process that's necessary in that. And so that's what's missing here. So recognizing that there's going to be conversations happening in the legislature on trying to create and establish a definition of environmental justice that can be that guideline, you know, that kind of baseline to help us think about this work might be really important. And so I'm not quite sure how to fit this in within here, but I do feel like I want to name that there is a difference between environmental justice and environmental equity. And equity is something that comes later. It's environmental justice that we are trying to address right now that does require an acknowledgement and a path forward for actually making whole the communities and the ecosystems, all creatures, right, that are part of this, to be able to make it move forward towards a goal of equity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes brilliant sense. I think it's a well stated. Thank you. So thinking about how we can incorporate that into our work, and I wonder where it definitely can belong in some principles that we might draft. I wonder, though, to your point, if there's a place we see where we might incorporate something into the charter, because I think it feels like a necessary step from where I sit. I'll invite others to respond to your comment, though, also. Yeah, go ahead if you have something else to add.
I do. I appreciate that. I mean, I think, well, so what we are finding, so within the work that we're doing with Senator Keisha Ram and that we're doing with the Vermont Renews Alliance is we are looking at, and the Vermont Law School, we are looking at state statutes across the country where they are using a definition of environmental justice. And so this is our opportunity to do this and do it right. And that will be a place. So if we are informing and making recommendations, that's, you know what I mean? That's going to come a part of this conversation that we'll want to hold.
Yeah, absolutely. So I could definitely, yeah, I mean, I think it's worth the calling out specifically. So yeah, Sue.
Well, maybe it could fit right after, you know, the subcommittee will review it has the state of Vermont equity assessment, but also the depth of environmental justice, you know, the broader definition, you know, because environmental justice isn't in the statute, I don't think, and it should come into play, whether it's in our principles that we're going to establish. I think that's a great way. But if we want to bring it into the charter, it might fit following this, you know, statement in the middle of the first paragraph, which talks about the equity assessments.
I'm just taking some notes on here, and then we can think about. I'm wondering if part of what we can do, just because of our time frame as well, which I think is challenging, part of what we can do is I can take some notes, and maybe someone can be tasked with trying to track some changes that we could review at our next meeting if folks agree that could be one way to move forward.
I think that's what we're going to have to do. Yeah, because there's just. And I so appreciate your taking the notes.
Great. Other thoughts? I mean, I know a lot of folks are new to the conversation. It might be your first meeting, but I just want to say, yeah, Iris, I'm so glad you're raising your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just noticing that it says rural, low income, and other marginalized communities, and that doesn't name race. And I think that that's a really important part of this work. And if we're going to start listing groups that we're explicitly going to be thinking about, we should name race.
Is the best way to do that by saying BIPOC communities, or is there a different way that you would state that?
I think there's a lot of other words we can use. I think that's maybe a discussion in terms of terminology, like people of the global majority or BIPOC. I don't know. Kaya, do you have anything to say on
that? I'm thinking about it a little bit. I appreciate that too. Yeah, because these are conversations that everybody's having right now, actually, on a number of different bills. So I'd like to put a pin in that. I think that you're dead on. I think you're like right on spot on raising that, because we are being specific in the previous 2 commas. You know what I mean? So we can be specific here as well. But let's put a bookmark there and come back with a little bit more of a discussion on that later.
Yeah, Bethany, go ahead, or Beverly. Sorry, Beverly.
Yeah, I think that the term BIPOC is something I'm seeing more and more often. And I think it is something that we have to have more of a conversation about. But I do definitely think that we need to name the racial diversity that we're talking about, that we're trying to include. So that was just my comment. Thank you.
Anyone else want to jump in there? Chris, you have your hand raised?
Sarah, I'm trying to find the document that we're working from, but can you scroll back up to that first paragraph again?
Yeah, for sure. It's in the agenda for the meeting, Chris, if that helps.
Yeah.
Okay, it's okay.
I moved it to, it is within the agenda. Okay. Right there, right there.
Okay.
So I'm wondering if where it says, but will further consider job, economic, and demographic impacts of various proposed recommendations set forth by other subcommittees. I'm wondering if we should actually call out structural and institutional racism in policy considerations. I know that's the legislative tasking of us, but I'm just wondering if we should just specifically call that out.
Okay, let me make a note. And it would probably, your suggestion would be something would belong in this first paragraph. So
yeah.
Okay.
To actually get at the policy foundations of some of the inequities and injustices that exist, and also trying to call out, making sure that we avoid creating new ones. I'll look at while we're thinking about it some more, and I'll keep trying to find that document again. Sorry, I've moved it to a place where I can find it. Now I can't figure out where I'll put it.
Great. So thanks. And I think as I'm looking at the time, I just want to be conscious of our agenda here, that we're sort of starting to cut into our next agenda item. So I'm not hearing anyone on our committee, and please do, if you have any questions, say, I'm not quite sure what's meant by that. I'm not hearing anyone say, I don't know what's meant by that. Because if there are areas that aren't clear, we should work to clarify them. Okay. And I'm not hearing anyone sort of call out a section where they're like, no, that doesn't feel like the work of our subcommittee, right? So I'm not hearing anyone call out any sections to say there's something in there that should be removed. And I think I'm hearing, I've taken some notes on some great additional items. I think that's great. Just as a process for moving forward, I think I'm going to propose that if there's anyone, is there anyone who's particularly interested in taking these notes and turning them into the next draft for us? Review next. And if not, I'm happy, Sue and I could take that as co-chairs. We could take a turn at that to bring back to this group for consideration, but definitely would welcome someone else to jump into that space. Okay, so then.
Can we make sure Beverly's hand is raised? Can we make sure, Beverly, did you get everything? Did you get an opportunity to say everything you wanted to?
Yeah, I just didn't know how to turn it off. Let me try it again.
Great, thank you. Thanks, I didn't notice that, so I appreciate you jumping in there. Okay, great. So not hearing from others. Thank you, very good. Not hearing from others, then we will, Sue and I will take a turn at bringing back to this group some edits based on the feedback here. And I guess I think it would be appropriate and fine if folks have other reflections after today or other specific suggested edits if you wanted to. I don't know. You tell me, Jay, if you think. I think it would be fine if you have additional reflections to bring them to our next meeting, or if you have specific language to send it in an email, and we can make those known at the start of the next meeting.
I guess our goal was to share these final ones up into to build them into the draft process roadmap and share them with the steering committee next Thursday. It's so hard. Yours is, I will give it to you. It's the most challenging one with respect to nuancing and really making sure the language is right. And I think that's okay. I'll just work off of that, but I'll talk with you sort of offline, perhaps, Sarah, about how best to meet that. Because I'm trying to be mindful of asking everybody to review things so quickly and then hoping to finalize them at the Climate Council meeting on the 22nd. So I was hoping to give people documents, before Sunday night, before the Climate Council meeting, but that's okay. We'll get there.
think we should be able to do that, and we can figure out how to support the steering committee in reviewing something before. Okay.
Thank you, Sarah.
Great. Excellent. So I'm going to keep us moving, which means I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second, if I can figure out how to do that. Oops, now you're seeing all my notes. Stop presenting. Okay. But my Teams is frozen again, so I'm sorry folks can't see me. But I think I wanted to turn it over to is it
Ellie?
Ellie, who's going to do the presentation on the scan for us. So Ellie, if you want to go ahead and share your screen or just walk through what you have for us today, that'd be great.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much. I've never shared in Teams, so 1 second. And it's saying I have to consent to recording.
What is it saying?
It's asking for like a consent to recording. Sorry, and it's taking me to settings. So 1 second. But I can just introduce the presentation. So I will be talking about what other states have looked into in terms of how they're bringing an equity and environmental justice lens to their work on their respective climate councils. And I can't share my screen unless I quit Teams, unfortunately. Sorry about this.
Ellie, is there a way for you to send it to Sarah?
Yeah, I could try that.
Is that what's needed, Sarah? Are you still there, or did your teams, are you?
I am still here. Hopefully, or she can, yes, we can try that. Maybe Ellie could start walking through it and I will try to pull it up.
Okay. Or could I also just leave and hop right back on? Is that possible?
Try that. Sure.
Sure. Sorry. Thanks.
I'll do a little intro for you.
Okay,
so while Ellie's gone, I'll mention that she's, one of our very first meetings when we were a much smaller group, we talked about, well, what are the resources out there? What else has been done? And we thought it would be at least helpful to look at our neighboring states who have some of what Vermont's Global Warming Solutions Act was modeled off of. So Ellie has done a pretty deep scan, which she's brought into a pretty condensed presentation of the New York, Maine, Connecticut, and Massachusetts, all of which have an environmental justice and climate justice or just transitions component. And the point you raised, Kaya, is very significant. You'll see how it's different in each state. So we're going to give a really brief look, and she has a lot of background information in there. Hi again, Ellie. Does it work now?
Let's see.
And she's been working on this on top of being a full-time student and has done a very deep dive, which I hope she gets to present today.
Ellie, if it doesn't work for you, you can quickly email it to me and I can run it for you if you'd like.
Okay, thank you. I think I should be all set to go.
Okay.
Yeah, just slow loading. I'm so sorry, you guys.
Mm-hmm. Ellie, you're Carrie's daughter, aren't you?
Yes. Do you know her?
I live in Waitsfield too.
Oh, no way.
Mm-hmm. And obviously I work with Carrie at the agency for a long time.
That's so funny.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I recognize you from running with your sweet big dog.
That's so funny. Okay, is that working now?
Yes.
Yes.
It's working for me. I hope it works for everyone.
We got there eventually. Thanks for bearing with me. So like I said, I'm Ellie Curtis from Waitsfield, and I've been looking into some of the background research. All right, so we do have the benefit of learning from our peers in this process. So we chose 4 states with similar processes that they've gone through to draw from. And it's worth noting that there are other states and cities that aren't on this list who have done great work, but this is just a starting point. So this is just a high-level table explaining the differences in demographics and relevant bills. So now I'll just walk through the states and their timeline structures, their equity focuses, and definitions and mapping, and then give some takeaways. And it's loading. Okay, so we're starting with New York, and they have a longer timeline than us. Their draft report is due by 2022, and they formed in 2020. And then hopefully the rules will be promulgated by 2024. And their structure is a Climate Action Council in the middle, and then a Just Transitions Working Group and a Climate Justice Working Group disaggregated, which is a little bit different than us, as well as advisory panels at the bottom that those two groups consult with. So their law itself is embedded with an equity lens. And that means that it calls for prioritization of marginalized groups, as well as providing a funding floor, which means that 35% of all funding within the programming has to go to disadvantaged communities. And so then the role of the Climate Justice Working Group is to figure out how to identify those communities in order to account for those benefits. And they also are tasked with developing a framework to test the outcomes of those investments. And then you have the Just Transitions Working Group, who is focused more on growing the workforce and studying potential disruptions from the transition. So their approach to mapping took lessons from the Cal EnviroScreen, which is California's mapping tool, and that took 6 years to develop and was very thorough, bringing in a lot of different indicators and identifying cumulative impacts on communities. So the first question they grappled with was place-based versus individual definition of low income and disadvantaged communities and populations. And they chose place-based, citing the importance of empowering whole communities. And so they're actually still in the phase of defining indicators using a selection rubric. So they're being very thorough in that process. And in the interim, they've developed a separate approach using area media income and race and ethnicity to be able to continue programming throughout. So some takeaways, their embedded equity lens definitely makes their work more defined, and they have a longer timeline to carry it out. And they've also separated climate justice and a just transition, which is making their work a bit easier within each. And their reliance on place-based mapping is also something I think we can learn from. All right, so next is Massachusetts, and they passed their GWSA in 2008, and they got to work in 2012. But it wasn't until 2019 that a working group was convened to focus on climate justice itself. So here you see their structure, and they also have this environmental advisory committee on the side. So that's working alongside their climate-focused groups. Right, so this slide sort of goes more into depth into what the Climate Justice Working Group does. So they first defined their definitions, and they broke it up into environmental justice, climate justice, and equity, which is sort of what Kaya was saying. That's really important to figure out really what you want to target. And to define environmental justice populations, they used a certain threshold for income, minority, and English isolation population. So it was a lot simpler than, say, what New York has been doing. And then they proposed guiding questions to evaluate the strategies from the working groups, and also proposed a scoring system on how to look at the different strategies and how applicable it would be to equity considerations. And then they used those guiding questions and the scoring approach to recommend changes to the final draft of their plan.
Negative.
Okay, so Massachusetts has two different systems for mapping. So first they looked at climate mapping and then environmental justice mapping, recognizing that those are two separate issues to be addressed separately. So for their climate mapping, they used the Social Vulnerability Index and downscaled climate projections overlaid on that. And that was done by researchers at UMass Amherst. And some takeaways from Massachusetts, they defined environmental justice and climate justice separately, like I said. They had a simpler indicator process. And they also just have a longer history of environmental justice considerations within the executive branch. Not to say that those have always been perfect, but it's definitely has like a better base to start with than we do. So we definitely have a lot of work to do. Okay, moving on to Connecticut. Their GWSA passed early as well in 2008, but it wasn't until 2019 that an executive order established the Equity and Environmental Justice Working Group. So within that working group, you'll see they split up the work into 4 different subcommittees, which is interesting given how much that working group is tasked with. So it seems like that would make it a bit easier to take on each different process. And they also define equity into 4 key concepts: distributive, procedural, contextual, and corrective, and list the prerequisites for the Governor's Council to follow within each category. So I thought that was also a good way of breaking up the work. And then the role of the subcommittee itself is to first develop guidelines for diverse stakeholder engagement, including remote guidelines now that we're in a pandemic. Second, to develop a framework for evaluation of the recommendations from the working groups, which they did and was very straightforward. And then third, to figure out how to show spatial distributions of environmental and climate health vulnerabilities through mapping and codify that into state policy. And then finally, to figure out how to maintain inclusion throughout the implementation process as well. So they then took this framework and responded to the working group's proposals delivered to the Governor's Council. And they also put out a webinar series to involve and inform the public. And I thought that was an interesting way to go about that. So some takeaways from Connecticut is that their definition of equity sort of breaks up the work really nicely and brings together the different tasks into different groups. And then they did bring in the equity considerations after the legislation was passed, and it did take executive action to do so. And finally, they formed the 4 subcommittees. All right, so next is Maine, and their timeline resembles ours a lot more closely than the other states. And they didn't bring in equity until around here in summer 2020, when they had an equity assessment team that suggested they do so. And then in the final plan, they developed a new subcommittee. And it's important to note that the original bill only had 2 mentions of equity before this subcommittee was brought in. All right, so their mapping and identification was done through a process of commissioning an outside consulting group for data collection, and they brought in the Social Vulnerability Index for Maine and overlaid it with climate projections. And it's important to note that the SVI, as it's called, doesn't account for environmental justice, and their mapping tool didn't account for cumulative impacts either. It just took one climate impact at a time. So it was a bit limited. And it was also completed for a no action alternative analysis rather than to learn what communities most need funding. So their equity assessment team was comprised of 3 members of University of Maine's Mitchell Center for Sustainability Solutions, and they were assessing the working group's initial recommendations through an equity lens and developed a framework for how to do that, which you'll see right here. And so each recommendation, they would just take through those questions. And it was through their recommendation that an equity subcommittee was founded. So that shows that their recommendations were taken seriously. And a second recommendation of theirs was for active, vulnerable community involvement through actual subgrants and recognizing that invitation is not enough. And then their third recommendation was to consider all factors contributing to inequity, not just climate change, because we know that there's a lot more that goes into that. And some limitations to their approach is that it was conducted without input over a short time period by 3 members of academia, so that's not very representative of the populations that they're discussing. So we do have to ask who is asking the questions, because we know that matters. Right, so takeaways from Maine. Their equity lens was also applied retroactively and with a lack of diversity on the initial assessment. So although a new subcommittee has taken its place, it's important for us to sort of learn from these mistakes. And the equity subcommittee now has a year to develop key metrics. And finally, they did have the only mapping tool that looked at jobs and unemployment. So bringing this all together, what can we learn from the other states? So if we look at their process, it all sort of followed this timeline, starting with definition and identification. And that was when sort of the council plan would come into place, and then they would retroactively assess each recommendation through a framework. And so I think that if you really want to have an equity lens from the beginning, it's important to deliver frameworks for each working group to start with. So I think that could be an important approach that we could follow, coming after all of these states and learning from them. In terms of structure, it's interesting to see how highly each state places their equity team or group, but they all pretty much consult with the Maine Council and advise working groups. And then no matter the framing or definition, they all took a spatial group-based approach rather than individual populations. So I think we could consider following suit, although there's room for layering. You're not just going to go one or the other. And finally, many states consulted with academia or outside groups. All right, so while there's a lot to learn from other states, it's important to also remember that Vermont is in a bit of a different position. So we have a much shorter timeline to work with. And here in our structure, you can see that the Rural Resilience Subcommittee is also highlighted, and that's because their mandate is to develop a municipal vulnerability index, like the mapping that I've talked about. So I'm not sure if that encompasses sort of how you define disadvantaged communities, but either way, I think we should start working with them early and often. And then you'll see us in the bottom right. The Just Transitions mandate is to develop a measurement tool or framework to guide the work of the other subcommittees. So I think that should be sort of where we start. So luckily we have a lot to build on in the state, and Vermont has first a social vulnerability index, which is a good place to start, but it doesn't really get at environmental justice issues. It's more economic. So it's important to remember that Vermont is not immune from that. Rejoice, Vermont has been doing sort of a hard look at environmental justice issues in the state and how to define it. And the Research Corps, headed by Bindu Panikar, developed a draft environmental health disparity index, which is something we should take a look at. So we do have a sort of a ground laid for us with that. And it's sort of using this spatial analysis tool that you see here. So just a few of the recommendations that I sort of came up with. We could consider subgroups like in Connecticut, but only if we think we have time to break ourselves down efficiently. I think it could be helpful, but our timelines definitely, it definitely discourages spending any more time on organization. And then vulnerability mapping is so important to figure out where to focus our energy. But I'm unsure if this is really our task or the other subcommittees. But either way, start a conversation. And then with frameworks, I think we could develop a tool for the other working groups first, and then also an assessment tool for us to evaluate their strategies once they come up with them. And in doing so, we could consider consulting like the other states have done, or working with academia. Just because I think our timeline is so short, we'll have to be efficient, but I think it's important to really make sure we choose the right people and include all voices, because we've seen mistakes happen in other states. And so finally, I was going to bring this up a little bit ago, but I think within our mandate, I think there's a difference between not inflicting further burden, as I think the language is, versus prioritizing these communities. So we should definitely consider that change, because I think it'll shape our priorities and how much we really focus on this really important piece of the puzzle. So that's sort of my take, and thank you for all listening. I appreciate it. And I am hoping to send out a longer version of this with a lot more details, because this was a very high level run through. But yes, thank you. Thank you all for listening. That's it.
Thanks, Ellie. So I think really great. Thank you so much. Just as a matter of process, I think it's 5:30 right now. I want to honor that that's our timeline. We also have committed to providing time for public comment at the end. So if the subcommittee is willing to stay and continue to meet for another 15 minutes, perhaps we can just think about some next steps and then allow for some time for public comment. And Ellie, I'm assuming you're going to be able to share that presentation with us, and we can send it out to subcommittee members and post online. That'd be great.
Will do. Thank you. I have another call that I have to go to, so I'm going to have to get off. So, thank you. And thank you for the presentation.
Are other subcommittee members able to stay and continue our meeting for another 15 minutes? Folks are okay with that? Great. Okay, excellent. So we don't really have a lot of time to dig into a whole lot that Ellie just put in front of us, which is really exciting to think about what the meat of this work will be and where we go. But any sort of initial reactions that people want to share? Okay. Yes, Nadia, please.
Great presentation, Ellie. Thank you so much for diving so deeply into this very complex issue area. I think one thing that your presentation really underscored for me, something I wanted to mention earlier about our charter, is we're going to have to not only integrate ourselves effectively within the other subcommittees, but perhaps more specifically within the data and science one, to ensure that all of the information recommendations that we're providing are actually based in the real world impacts, and we can provide some, real world examples to that. And so I don't know if it's worth integrating that language into our charter as well. Sorry for my kids in the background.
That's great. Thank you, Nadia. I made a note about that and looking at our charter. Thank you. Others, initial reactions or thoughts? Okay, great. Sue, yes.
Well, there were a couple things that we that are in the chat that I won't repeat, but worth mentioning. And I will just say that for me, and this is my second time through Ellie's, and the first time was even more depth, but we tried to make it short. There's a lot of data that we need to really invest in developing, mapping, et cetera, for us to have any kind of screen. So I don't, I just want to make sure that that's being translated somehow to the other groups. And I guess I'm going to look to you, Jane, to be thinking about that. Thanks.
Yes, definitely more to talk about on that topic. Nadia, I'm going to assume that you don't have another comment. Your hand is still up, but please jump in if you do. Okay. Great. So I think, so Ellie will share this presentation. I think there are some, even if there are reports or other, you know, documents, key documents from those states, I think people might also want to have those. Ellie, maybe you can include that as well. And we'll send that out to folks for review. And I think let's just spend a couple minutes thinking about what our goals are for the next meeting. And I think we also would benefit from confirming whether this is our regularly scheduled meeting time, and also whether or not we might flex ourselves to put in 2 hours into a meeting, since I know we've been really stretched to make an hour and a half be an effective meeting time. So I'm just going to throw that out there. So, so the easier piece of this is to say, does this time continue to work for people to meet? We were meeting at 3:30 to 5 or 4 to 5:30, and I would just propose that we go for 2-hour time block. Does that work for everyone? Okay. Not hearing objections. Trying to monitor the chat box.
Are you? I'm sorry. Are you suggesting 4 to 6 or 3:30 to 5:30?
Yeah, I think I'm suggesting 4 to 6 in honor of other people's work commitments. And
It's totally fine with me, but I remember that Kelly Klein, did she say she had a hard stop at 5:30 with her kid? I can't remember.
7 o'clock.
There you go. You're all set.
Yeah. Okay, great. Let's do 4 to 6. I think that honors people's other lives better. Not everybody's doing this on the job. Great. So I will go ahead and just plug in a standing meeting. I think that will help us as well. Goals for the next meeting, we will definitely come back to this charter. We can spend a little bit more time on it. Kaya, I saw your comment that it deserves more time. I really appreciate that. So let's do that. Other goals for our next meeting. I know we had talked about potentially bringing some folks from our neighboring states to come and talk more in depth about their work and maybe allow us a chance to do some Q&A with them. Would that be sort of also a good sort of next step? Okay, we'll think about how to put that in. Yeah.
I know that Jane, I believe, reached out to Maine. I've reached out to Massachusetts. So if one of them, I think it might make sense to go with one state at a time, given what we just saw. We also have the public meeting law discussion. We have to finish, I think, the charter. Or are we saying, so,
that
yeah.
Sounds good. Yep. Okay, I think that's enough for us to schedule next week, and Sue and I will come together and try and start to think more than 1 week out at a time. I think that will also help us with this timeline. So we'll start on that.
Oh, sorry. The week after, you'll probably be ready to have your like a substantive meeting with the contractor should be in place.
Great.
Which will start, and you can really start to talk about public engagement if you're ready, or they could just be here to listen if they need to.
That's great to keep in mind. Okay. So any final comments, thoughts from our subcommittee members? So much great stuff in the chat box. Thank you. All right, I'm going to open it up for public comment then. So if you're here from the public and you want to add some additional thoughts for our subcommittee to consider, we would really appreciate and welcome that. So feel free to raise your hand, or if you can't do that if you're on the phone, feel free to just jump in. Maybe introduce yourself. Okay, well, we might because we ran over a little bit as well, but I did see some members of the public earlier. Okay, thanks everybody. I guess we'll wrap it up, and I just want to say thank you for bearing with me and my very poor technology today. We'll work on that in the future, and I will send out an email like I did last week with some action items, just because while they'll be in the minutes can sometimes take a few days. So, I'll try and include Ellie's PowerPoint and maybe some other links in that as well. So thanks everybody. Have a great night.
I wanted to put a shout out to Ellie. Great presentation.
It was great.
It's so awesome to have such technical expertise with us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Awesome.
truly.
It was awesome.
That's great.
Yeah,
Thank
this
you.
was great.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you. Have a great night. Enjoy the sun. Get outside before it's dark.